Hi, I'm Florian Huber. In this video I want to talk to you about need finding and ideation. This will be a very practical unit with strategies and tools that you can apply right away. So let's get to it. Let's put need finding and ideation in context. What is important about need finding and ideation is to both view them together. So in this slide you see that a problem space and the solution space should always be thought of together. They need to match, they need to have a fit between the two. So in this model, which I really like, you go through a couple of steps, and I want to show this to you to put need finding and ideation in context. So the first thing you would do when you set out on these projects you're about to do is you're going to go into a phase of discovery. So you're trying to understand what the context actually is, what you're trying to do. You're doing your user research. You try to gain empathy for the people you're actually building something for. And this means you're going wide, so you're diverging. You're trying to think of as many options and research as many options as possible. And then you would converge, so you would narrow down choices and define and synthesize a point of view, try to frame opportunities. This would lead you to a specific problem you're trying to address in your project. Next phase would be to develop, and that's where ideation comes in. So only if you've framed the right problem before, we move on to do ideation. And ideation consists of coming up with ideas, so something like brainstorming, but also building low-resolution prototypes, for example. And then the next step, the final step, would be to deliver, so to test and adjust the ideas, the concepts you came up with, and to bring them to market. Now, in this model, it rarely happens the way it's shown on the slides here. So what happens in reality is you would move between those two back and forth to try to find that fit. So you rarely go through this once, which means you might find a problem, but then move on to a solution, but then sometimes you just have to go back because you haven't framed the problem in the right way. And it also means that you might have to iterate in smaller loops between the different steps in this process. Right, so one of the most basic tools there is to go deep into need finding and to really understand the people you're trying to build something for is 3 easy questions, and that's what, how, and why. And you would ask them in this order, so you would move from the what to the how to the why. And this would mean you would move from the concrete to the emotional. So moving from the what would be if you, for example, observe something out in the field, or if you hear people say something in an interview, that would be the actual behavior. So what are people doing? The how is their attitude. So how are they doing it? Are they happy? Are they sad? And then the most important is the reasons why they're doing it, the why. And this is really drilling deep, going down to their beliefs, going down to the root cause of human behavior. And this is where it gets really complex. So you rarely get by only asking why just once, but you're going to ask it multiple times, 3 times, 5 times, 10 times. And then you get to the really deep level where human behavior really gets interesting. So you need to decompose human behavior at a very deep level. And only then can you go back to the how and say, now I'm going to, with this understanding of the human behavior at a deep level, you go back to the how. So how could something like this look like? And again, you're going to ask it multiple times to find out the best mechanism. And then you go back to the what. So you would have multiple options of addressing this attitude and that behavior. So you're also going to have different options of the what might look like. Another tool that might be of help to you is an empathy map. There's different versions of this out in the web. The version I use has basically 7 categories. So you would start with the one person that maybe you've observed in the field or that you interviewed, and just give them a name and take a piece of paper, just a blank piece of paper, and draw 7 boxes. Just a framework of trying to go deeper in the analysis of what those people are actually saying, doing, feeling, etc. And then use several categories to cluster the information you've found or that they've told you directly. So the categories might look like this. First category would be what did people actually say. So direct quotes they said to you, they mentioned to you. Another category, what is that people do, their actually behavior. And also ask if you, for example, observe them in the field, see what works and what doesn't work for them. What do they think? And this is where you have to make inferences. So you rarely get people to speak freely about what they actually think. This is something where you have to use your judgment and trying to dig deep into what you think might be the reasons behind them and what they are thinking. And this often doesn't coincide with what they actually say or do. So sometimes they say something to you, but they might think something differently. And similarly, try to identify what they actually feeling. So the hidden emotions behind their actions or something they said to you in an interview. And then you can use 3 additional categories that really help you to drive the process further. So go out and look for their needs. So what are the things that people really, really need? Maybe latent needs, so something that's not obvious on the surface, but something they need deep down. Clayton Christensen also calls this job to get done. So what jobs are they actually trying to get done while you're observing their behavior? And what are their pains? So what is something that keeps them up at night? What are obstacles they're facing right now? And another category that's really interesting is we call them insights. These are things that you can leverage towards building new solutions and build new ideas. So usually these are the non-obvious things you've noticed, unanticipated things you've learned about human behavior during that process. The next step, if you've dug deep into that human behavior, would be to look for opportunities. And usually when you set out on that journey of solving one of those wicked, ill-defined problems, you set out with a couple of assumptions. So you think maybe you already have an idea, or you think there might be a problem out there somewhere, but there's still assumptions. You need to validate them. And you're also going to have a lot of blind spots. There's still so many things that you don't know yet. So you would set out and with the tools that I've shown you before, collect these insights, needs, and the jobs to be done, and try to play with them and try to see if you can arrange them in a certain way, kind of cluster them, categorize them, so that opportunities would emerge. So you basically play with the data until you find common themes in that data that you could later use to build ideas or build prototypes on. And these rarely fit into nice categories. So it might be that they're completely disconnected. One person told you this, the other person told you a different thing. But you need to work with that. And from this, you could come up with, we call them opportunity frames. So these are really opportunities that cluster a couple of the insights that you've learned about people, about their behavior, about their context, that you could later use to build your ideas on, to build your prototypes on. And these might overlap. So some of them might address similar needs. Some of them might be in completely different directions. That's fine. But they're usually smaller than the assumptions you set out with. And that might be counterintuitive to have smaller opportunity frames after the research process, but that's actually the good thing. So the more narrow you can define the problem, and the deeper you have, the deeper you can create that understanding and empathy for the people you're building something for, the better. So these validated opportunities, you're trying to get them more refined, smaller, and better over time. From these, you could move on to create ideation questions. So very concrete topics that you would look for ideas. So we usually try to frame these as how might we questions. That makes them very open, makes them very approachable. And these how might we questions would leverage the user research and the market research you've collected before. They shouldn't neither be too broad or too narrow. Now we're finally moving into the ideation bit. I've collected a couple of rules for you for this ideation phase. These work equally well if you try to come up with ideas alone or if you do this in a group. They work well for a group brainstorm, for example. So on this slide, the first 4 rules They're universally applicable. The bottom 4 rules, they're especially helpful if you try to ideate in a group. So let's go through them one by one. Rule 1 is go for quantity first and select for quality later. This is really hard to do, but you have to force yourself to come up with a range of options, a range of possibilities before you start selecting them. So really, that leads to rule 2, postpone debate and judgment of ideas. You have to come up with a quantity of solutions first, and then you can pick out of 100 ideas versus just going with the first one that came to mind. Rule number 3 is encourage wild ideas and exaggerated ideas. So some of these ideas that you might come up with might be crazy, but keep them around. They might not make it onto the final list of ideas you want to work on, but they really help you think and help you navigate out of your comfort zone and think of really groundbreaking ideas versus just small incremental new ideas. Try to be visual in your approach. Bullet points are really not the best way of collecting ideas. A blank piece of paper works much better. Try to be visual. You will have to communicate your ideas to others, especially if you work in a group. If you draw something, just a very basic sketch, is so much easier to follow by your team members than if you just use words. And now the other 4 rules are, as I said, especially helpful if you work in a group. If you have a team of people working to come up with ideas, start by capturing individual ideas first. So don't start with the whole group right away, but try to come up with a couple of individual ideas, each person separately. This means you're going to collect ideas from a broader range of points of view. If you jump into group brainstorm, for example, right away, you usually cluster the new ideas around the first 1 or 2 ideas that were thrown out there, and you narrow down your focus too much in the beginning. After you collected the individual ideas, rule 6 applies: build on the ideas of others. So don't criticize ideas that are out there, but rather try to be constructive and build on things that have already been said. So come up with variations of ideas from a previous person. Rule number 7, a very basic one, but in groups it can be quite hectic if you kind of try to throw out 100 ideas in a short period of time. Try to have one conversation at a time. So one person is speaking and the other ones are listening to them, to really create a group understanding and not have 5 people talking individually versus as a team. Rule number 8 is every person, every idea has worth. This especially applies, for example, if you brainstorm with people from the outside or maybe with customers even. So if you don't consider them an expert and you have been working in a domain for a very long time, it's easy to kind of play down things that other people said that haven't been researching this or working on this for such a long time. But really every idea at this stage is helpful and can contribute towards a better solution in the end. So if you find yourself ideating alone, personally, my favorite tool is just pen and paper. I'm very old school that way, but I think that's the best way of just coming up with ideas. So sit somewhere where you feel comfortable and force yourself to use a couple of tools or frameworks that might help you think. I've prepared a couple of them here that really work well for me. So if I try to come up with ideas alone, I usually start with a mind map. So I put the how might we question, our ideation question, in the middle, and try to come up with a couple of thicker branches. So these would be themes that I might consider for new ideas. And then I would branch out for each theme to come up with new ideas. You could start thinking in a sequence, for example, or try to use a decision tree, which works really well if you try to think through multiple perspectives from the user's point of view. Thinking in terms of networks works really well. So trying to identify connections between people or companies, entities, etc. But you rarely have, a single case isolated somewhere. Thinking in networks really helps you to visualize the complexity of what you're working on. And use simple diagrams to visualize the connection of several variables how they play together, how they're not playing together. Now, if you've come up with a lot of these ideas, don't narrow it down too fast. Don't just go, from the 100 ideas and pick the first one and only pick one. Try to take forward a number of ideas. And these are still single individual ideas. So a good strategy is to try to cluster them. So a lot of them might actually lead into the same direction and can be packaged together in one concept, one larger kind of theme. So what we usually do is just play with all the ideas that are out there and see what goes together and what doesn't. Categorize them, and then use a couple of criteria to just evaluate them. Doesn't mean that if they score low on one of the criteria that you kick them straight away. But these are just criteria that help you think about what might be good ideas to take forward. So as you see on the slide, 2 criteria might be, for example, the effort and resources needed to implement that idea, or the expected effect of that idea. So how big would it be? How much would it actually target the pain points of the users? Other criteria that have worked really well for us would be, for example, one axis of obvious and non-obvious solutions, or categorizing them by the long shot ideas. So the things that you don't really see how they might work in the end, but if you make them work, they have a really big impact, also sometimes called a dark horse prototype or idea. You might also look for just ideas that might delight the users you're building them for, or just ideas you personally favor. Or you might also use, for example, social impact as a criteria for evaluation. Now, if you've done this, you will likely have a short list of ideas to take forward, and that takes me to the next point. Really, this quote says it perfectly. The best way to experience an experience is to experience it. This was said by Bill Mogridge, one of the co-founders of IDEO, who sadly passed away in 2012. But ultimately, you need to remember that only the users can tell you if your ideas are good or not. So you will have to turn them into low-resolution prototypes, something that other people can interact with to actually see if they work or not. And this will be covered in one of the later units. So thank you for watching, and goodbye.